Pleasure to be here. Betty has done a terrific job in attracting participants from Chicago and nationally to this workshop, and I will explicitly build more on some of the themes I have listened to in this room in the last few years. And I'll summarize really work in three areas. Arts participation studies like the NEA. Two, participation in the arts compared to other civic activities, extending bowling alone and these ideas. And third, reformulating concepts to capture new developments in cultural policy in social context, especially the idea of scenes. I draw on cultural policy consulting with mayors and cultural activists from Paris to Seoul to Chicago, and contributions with several collaborators. A surprise participant on our corner here is Stephen Sawyer, who's the director of our French Paris study, and I've learned a lot with Steve in the Parisian context, and he will join in occasionally, and especially for Q&A. And we have Magna Kubeka and Ilana Ventura who will comment a little as well. Part one: how's arts participation changing? The NEA and many other national governments do citizen surveys to monitor changes in arts participation. The benchmark items show a slight decline with the NEA, sparking debate. Why? One, a fall in attendance impacts how much to invest in buildings, closing museums and other facilities, which is more central to boards of nonprofits and a few policymakers. Second, what are the implications of a change in arts participation? This is much harder, more conceptually complex, it demands more data and careful analysis, and it links cultural policy with social science. Betty Farrell brought in key participants in the NEA discussions, and the two main results were, to simplify a little, flat participation or decline in the benchmark items. Not much change, or people were participating less. Second, class is a key driver. Higher status persons participate more. Paul DiMaggio and Mark Stern report examples which feature this kind of result again and again. Yet, as these results were discussed and people began to ask questions, what really holds here well? We had the articulation of concern by Rocco Landesman, and he interestingly invokes more than the benchmark items. Just might go back briefly. These are the benchmark: jazz, classical, opera, musicals, plays, ballet, and other dance. Visit art museums, and that's okay. Those are the benchmark items, the famous benchmark with the NEA. But what if we consider other kinds of artistic and cultural activities? Might that change things? The NEA commissioned multiple studies to try to think about this more thoughtfully, and most of them more or less repeated what we already knew, with one major exception by Jennifer Novak-Leonard, who's right here in the other corner, and Alan Brown. And this is the cover of their study, which sounds simple and descriptive, and it was written in a way that sounded simple and descriptive. When she presented it, just sounded simple and descriptive, but it challenged fundamentally the whole conceptual framework used by the NEA studies in the past. One fundamental difference was here: to study not just those benchmark items, but to look at three kinds of participation: attendance, creation in the arts, and third, media participation. This adds people who said, I play a musical instrument, I knit, I sing in a gospel choir, I listen to the radio, which are not in the benchmark. And when she did that, the results hugely changed. Not only did participation drastically rise, But to answer my second question, why? How do these things fit together? She analyzed race, class, gender, and national origin, race, class, and gender effects. And at least in the presentation, I couldn't find it in the report, but she said it explained about 10 to 20% of the variance in participation. Okay, I'm going to elaborate some implications of her report. This is maybe a little small to read, but this is basically the descriptive tables, not the regression, but they show you the range of other things which she included in addition to the benchmark. We have many other studies, and I won't go through reviews. We got lots of stuff which do find disparate results. Some things more flat, some things increasing, some things declining. But the main thing I want to try to do, which is a little different from most of this past literature, is to join this tradition of the NEA, more descriptive studies, empirical studies, with the main concepts. What are the big concepts in cultural policy and civic participation? These include Marx and class, leading to Walter Benjamin, Adorno, Horkheimer, Lucien Goldman, the British Birmingham studies of popular culture, plus the so-called, let's say, secular, as Lipset used the term, secular Marxism, like his Political Man, or Verbanei and Brady's civic participation models. Further ideas are Veblen for conspicuous consumption, Bourdieu's book Distinction, and then in another theme we have Tocqueville's civic participation ideas updated by Robert Putnam, especially in Bowling Alone. Many smart scholars with Marxist backgrounds have done new books that wander far from Father Karl, like Sharon Zucken or Harvey Malich or others in especially Gay Paris, where they theorize a little more than we usually do. And Steve is remarkable in linking us to all of this. I participated in rethinking and testing these kinds of ideas for decades as a student of Adorno, a young collaborator with Bourdieu, and so forth. And one main result was seven books on what we call the new political culture, or others call the third way, or Bobo, Bohemian bourgeois. And here is a one-page summary of the new political, of 7 books. All you need is one page, one picture. All right. Illustrated by people like Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, and majorities of citizens in the US, Europe, and Japan. With globalization, there's an increase in these seven dimensions of not just left and right, but more social and cultural issues, more citizens, more issue specificity, and these are especially true among younger engaged persons. This in turn leads to less emphasis on ethnicity, national government, less on clientelism and less on class politics, and more consumption on public goods, consumption and amenities, and a new flexible economy kind of thinking. All right. One NPC idea is that party bosses or social classes decline and citizens act more individually, clustering around many separate policy issues like the environment or arts groups. And to assess this, we analyze citizen participation data in separate issues like each of these churches, unions, and then arts and culture. By contrast, most past research on civic groups like Putnam and Bowling Alone use one measure, summing up all kinds of participation from churches to union to the arts. They put them all together. Similarly, in the 1990s, the NEA studies and Paul DiMaggio implicitly followed Bourdieu on class and Putnam in analyzing the benchmark items and ignoring other types of art. We found dramatic differences when we looked. That is, arts participation, if we now look at World Values Survey items, U.S. had 3,000 citizens, and what happened from 1981 to 1999? It doubled. A doubling. This is the opposite of the benchmark results. We said, you know, what's wrong? How can we interpret this? In the Netherlands, tripling in the same period. The second main point was then to test the kind of dynamic, the Tocqueville-Putnam idea, that participate. Well, sorry, let me show one or two more here, just to give you a little bit more feel for other countries. Generally held across Northern Europe, Korea, Scandinavia, but also Italy. It did not hold in the former communist countries, where there was a decline, and it was flat around those countries in the middle. But in general, it was not just one or two countries. There are a lot of places where the arts are really rising or hugely taking off according to these items. This is a subjective item where you, the respondent, can say, yes, I participate. But you can choose, that is, if you do your own dance alone to your own music at home and nobody ever sees you and you never buy a ticket or you never join an organization, that counts. But you would not turn up in the NEA in some NEA items, perhaps. Okay, or some of Putnam's data, okay. So, in brief, this tends to heighten probably the informal, less organized, volatile organizations, which we know are key for a lot of the arts and cultural stuff. Even if we discovered that Tocqueville could not karaoke in Seoul and Tokyo, this led us to ask more focused questions. Why did his music play so poorly in some neighborhoods in LA or Chicago or Paris? Can he rap? Steve Sawyer did a brilliant case study of Bohemian and the Comédie Française, which he might tell us about a little later if he so chooses, which comes in here. And that he knows the context. Related, Laurent Fleury. So that's too small. I'm going to skip this over for now. But here's the title of a book just about to be published, and the chapters are pretty small. But basically, we contrast European and Asian contexts and how things change. Laurent Fleury has a new book that clearly transcends by Bourdieu. Bourdieu, by going to the TNP, the Théâtre National Populaire, and shows that it was similar to the Communist Party in having cells, 10 to 20 persons who had mentors who would ask them, what did you see when you saw Macbeth? They'd have discussions on a continuing basis, and this in turn was followed up later on at the Pompidou Center in Beaubourg, which draws more visitors today than the Eiffel Tower and Louvre combined. Like the TNP, it used mentors, creating active membership groups, and found dramatic success with this broad general public, not just upper status elite, the opposite of Bourdieu's theory. Fleury stresses that adults can discover the arts, and how institutions like museums are managed makes a huge difference. The specifics, so even if museums in general are flat, some of them, a small number, are really taking off. That's a story we'll elaborate off and on. Major American example are the Guggenheim, which expanded to Bilbao and Venice by arguing that an art museum could enhance an urban scene and spark tourism and economic development. Very entrepreneurial chairman of the board who went around and got these things internationally. This is a major new thrust that some mayors have also followed, and one of the most important was Mayor Daley II. Contrast the changes he brought to Chicago's. Actually, here's Steve Sawyer, a little bit of Steve's work he may tell us more about, but just showing you the subtlety as well as the aesthetic elegance of what they do in Paris. Northwest Europe is the top line. We went to Asia and sometimes zero impact. Korea, Japan, participation, Koreans participate more than Americans in civic organizations, but they don't build trust and legitimacy. Why not and how this works then becomes an interesting question. And then is this only Korea? Seoko Kim did a PhD and he showed no, it's also Brazil, Portugal, Eastern Europe, Russia, in ways that challenge Tocqueville. in the sense if this is the Tocqueville main story that we know from Putnam and so forth. This does not fit. Tocqueville cannot karaoke is the point of this. And sometimes civic participation can decrease trust and legitimacy. Imagine you're in a gang, a Chicago gang. The more you participate, the more you say the man is against me. The more you listen to rap, maybe, if you listen to the lyrics and you believe them, you may feel more anti-trusting. Okay, so going to Seoul and Tokyo can illuminate subcultures, let's say in Le Grand Paris and the bidonville, the areas around Paris, have those aspects of illegitimacy in a powerful way. All right. Back to Chicago. Hypotheses. Hyde Park in the north side, maybe Tocqueville. White traditional Catholic neighborhoods, maybe no relationship. In some African American neighborhoods, maybe zero or negative. We can learn by traveling and understand our own neighborhoods better, potentially. Arts in Chicago, dramatic changes. How did Daley do this? This is what we've been exploring for about 25 years with a series of oral history interviews. And I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, going back and forth between Paris, Chicago, Tokyo, Seoul, and then national surveys of neighborhoods, often communes or zip codes in the U.S. Seoul is building on both Paris and Chicago, but is 4 times larger than New York and is investing far more resources in design and more. In the last decade, we've collaborated internationally on the Cultural Scenes Project, completing 7 monographs. Steve Sawyer is a leader from Paris, and we can illustrate some cross-national work that can enlighten us all. For example, the French Ministry of Culture goes way beyond the NEA and asks about downloading music, cell phone links to culture. And indeed, these are major growth areas which are omitted by the benchmark and by the NEA question. So even Jennifer couldn't answer those. Same thing in Chicago, where kids in Bronzeville and Englewood use rap songs. Rap and hip hop are not included in the NEA items. But there could be in the World Values Survey items, which would explain some of the disparity between these the different results. Okay, the traditional Chicago pattern is this. Political leaders give jobs to campaign workers. They give favors to the citizens, Christmas chickens who vote for the political leader. That's Daley 1, the old Chicago. Daley 2 changed things. Harold Washington was the key link, and Daley 2 followed Harold Washington in saying reform. And then look at this. Chicago, and then Jane Byrne brought in Chicago Fest. She started it, and it's taken off hugely. The number of people coming to Navy Pier is 7 million in 1999. 5 million went to the Grand Canyon. More beautiful than the Grand Canyon? In our own Chicago way. Okay. I've gone through parts 1 and 2 on the participation studies, comparing to civic groups. Now I want to shift more specifically to art scenes. And we see this with vengeance in Chicago. The arts solved the political problem of moving beyond Beirut on the Lake and council wars, that is, transcending ethnic conflict and private goods competitions by changing the rules of the game to offer the popular public goods of Chicago Fest, Summer Dance, Lollapalooza for 4 months, shared by all or many Chicagoans and visitors. And the big theme of Trees and Row Violins, our book, shows these results clearly in the growth of the arts spending. Sorry, here's just our... let me just run through a couple of these quickly on sort of transformations in Chicago. And in general, and right now, I'm going through things a little bit fast. We can come back to if you're interested. I'm giving you a little flavor of what's there. The lady with the hats, who also says, I carry a gun, pulled it out on the city council floor, so forth. The contrast with elsewhere, especially two other cities with lots of organized crime, clientelism. Naples and Bogota went through very similar transformations, as Eleonora Pezzati has shown in her great book. The mafia controlled parking. The new mayor came in, the mafia did not. New mayors visibly using public culture, public arts in the same way as Chicago, basically, but sometimes going further. So we're now moving on to add culture and the arts. And my point is there are analogous processes going on in each of these that resemble some of our new political culture, and that there's interpenetration of the arts with culture here. And I'm going to just give a few examples to illustrate. Scenes can detail neighborhood dynamics, relate more generally to consumption. Before I get to that, I want to briefly show you the transformation in Chicago-wide politics. And at the top, we have this is the new political culture ideas, and these key dimensions of the new political culture are the columns, which inform basic changes and dimensions of change from daily 1 to daily 2. And we see a rise of social and aesthetic, a rise of independent organized groups, empowerment of individual citizens, and especially the use of the arts and culture as a public good shared by people generally, which was a political resource above and beyond jobs and chickens. Amenities are non-market goods. So a scene is a cluster of amenities. And I want to move into that, but whoops. Okay, yeah. Okay, but just, sorry, they're linking Chicago to the arts. Big rise with daily 2 in arts spending. Dramatic increases in what went there. Okay, so scenes. A scene is a cluster of amenities. And amenities are non-market goods like Thai restaurants, Baptist or Catholic churches, and we summarize some 600 of them from electronic yellow pages, the census, and citizen surveys, usually for each U.S. zip code. And they include these dimensions, especially defined by the values, which I'll play up in a minute. And we contrast scenes with these earlier classic categories by the focus on feelings, experience, moods, emotions, by consumers, linked to amenities around lifestyle sensibilities and affect as a key resource, in contrast to influence or money or power, which are central in the other domains. These are examples of our 15 main scenes dimensions that in a more abstract analytical context. We can then recombine these, or Steve then built some new dimensions, some new combinations of these in France to deal with the styles of life of restaurants and so forth, and the Paris Underground, which he produced a film, a great video on Paris, which I recommend to you. These are the raw data. Thai restaurants, Baptist or Catholic churches. Note on the list, there's 763 Catholic churches in Chicago. There are only 342 in New York, and below that in LA. I talked about this in LA, and said people said, "Oh, it's the film industry," and so forth, glamour and the like. Glamour is just film. And I said, well, how about children's clothing? They don't go to film studios. LA, 742. Hugely above New York and Chicago. These are interesting ways of capturing dynamics of neighborhoods and what people spend their time and money on. These are pretty small print, but these show you examples of the amenities that we've got that come in from these raw data sources and that we then pulled together in the indexes of the 15 dimensions, like glamour, self-expression, localism. How to make sense of such richness? We follow Wagner and Levi-Strauss and posit 15 deep structures that can transform and recombine into multiple scenes, like Bohemia or Bobo. And these are challenging traditional ethnic labels internationally, albeit less in some Chicago neighborhoods than other locations. This is a new tool to monitor and assess differences across neighborhoods and countries, and to monitor changes in aesthetic values as embedded in lifestyles. And I'll just give you some snippets, and then we can see what we want to elaborate. So here are some examples of traditionalism versus neighborliness. And here, the three big US cities are pretty close. Paris has got a lot more of both. Madrid is higher on neighborliness, and so forth. We can look at metro areas and see that self-expression is distinctly high in LA. It's lower in New York, and so forth. We can go down to the neighborhood level and look at neighborliness I live in Bronzeville, I'm happy to say, in contrast to those self-expressive people in the further northern parts of the city. LA, it's the west side of LA that's self-expressive, these Hollywood folks in West. But if you use psychological questions such as the so-called Big Five, and ask people and there are millions of people who've described themselves using classic psychological items, and then we get, not like the normal, quote, maps of crime, income, race, and so forth. People on the south side are agreeable, and the near west side are agreeable, and they're extroverted, whereas people on the north side are neurotic. They describe themselves. These are psychological science. Okay. All right. Getting closer to the artists. Are artists Bohemians? I'll come back to that, but this is one way. This is a way of linking the general ideal type of Bohemian by using our scene's 15 dimensions. So Bohemians are more transgressive, somewhat exhibitionistic, self-expressive. They're not utilitarian. They may be somewhat charismatic, and so forth. And we've worked a fair amount on this with Rich Lloyd and others. If we compare Chicago to Toronto, because Dan Silver, our lead collaborators there, and Toronto and Chicago are leading innovators in the rise of the arts in the two countries. The stories are very different of how they got there. So we see this rise in spending and so forth in Chicago. In Chicago, it's more top-down. Millennium Park, the top civic leaders, the mayor, and so forth. In Toronto, it's much more bottom-up. They're neighborhood arts groups that play a role that looks much more like Tocqueville. Artists are civic activists. They organize little neighborhood organizations. They fight gentrification. They fight development if it's not in tune with artistic concerns. The mayor even heavily sided with them against some others, and Mr. Ford ran against the artists and cyclists, and he won. Chicago, by contrast, developed the arts more top-down, as I'm mentioning. Tim Guilfoyle has a book on Millennium Park. And how do the arts attract people to Chicago? The key finding is Chicago has attracted more 25 to 34-year-olds from 1990 to 2000 in the 3-mile downtown area than any other metro area in the U.S. What's so attractive about the downtown, and how does this work? It's hard to be convincing with just one case, so we analyzed all 45,000 zip codes with statistical controls, and we find that glamour and self-expression drive growth of jobs across the U.S. more than does cost of living, population size, or crime. But the number one driver beyond these was the number of arts jobs as a location coefficient. Not only artists, but all sorts of people moved to zip codes where artists live or used to live until the prices went up too far, like Wicker Park. Scenes with aesthetic appealing amenities attract specific types of persons, like artists. And artists in turn help transform neighborhoods. They in turn attract more people and jobs, but patterns vary for different types of scenes if we look more closely. Bohemianism is the key in Jane Jacobs' writings, as she suggests that it fosters innovation in cities and neighborhoods like Greenwich Village. And in the karaoke book, we asked Asians about Bohemians, but most answered, "What's that? We don't karaoke, we don't have those Bohemians." The concept is barely present in most of Asia, so we developed alternative interrelated dimensions like self-expression, transgression, and respect for authority, and analyzed them to see where and how they worked in a similar manner to the West or not. Artists are often treated as Bohemian, as in Rich Lloyd's Neo-Bohemia book, but think of wives of affluent executives who do watercolors. Values, that is, are distinct from occupational categories, and those ladies may not tell the census that they are artists either. They may say, "I'm a housewife," or whatever. So values are distinct from occupational categories, and how much and where artists are Bohemian thus becomes an interesting question. And we show how to capture Bohemianism. I showed you briefly that slide where we have the dimensions, the 15 dimensions. And warning, what I'm going to do here now is just flip through several further slides to give you a flavor of what's here. And we don't need to talk about it, and I want to leave time for others and discussion. So these are just examples of some of the international scenes data which we're now using to expand these things internationally. For instance, we join with scenes with class to show that scenes can be added to many other concepts and bring out new insights. One example is to correlate the 15 different dimensions, one by one, with income or rent. Steve did this for Paris, which showed that glamour and income or rent were very strongly correlated. It was a bit weaker in Chicago, but in Seoul the relation became negative. High rent areas were the least glamorous. Glamour here may be a nouveau riche indicator. Similarly, churches in France are in glamorous neighborhoods and grand scenes with elegant dimensions. But in the US, churches are negatively correlated with income. They're found more in Bronzeville than they are in Lincoln Park. Thus, with the 15 dimensions of aesthetics to play with, some are close to class, as glamour in France, while others are sometimes totally uncorrelated with class. So we're getting at something that's quite different from the normal class explains it all kind of story, which is too widely the case even in the arts. Program for the future, the International Scenes book, were participants from multiple countries, illustrated today by Magda from Poland and Steve from France. And we're assembling more detailed data on the arts categories at local levels in each country to show how they co-vary with different dimensions of scenes. Ideally, that even if there's a flat line for museums, one of Betty's foci, for instance, some of them can be seriously transformed by incorporating scenes dimensions within the museum. So the Florent Fleury example, the Chicago Fest example, and this one here. The most frequently attended fashion-related Met exhibit was Lady Gaga's outfits. All right? That's not what you normally would go to the Met for. But this is something that some museums are doing to transform their context. Okay.
Can I just add really quickly that this exhibit alone increased Met's with the passes, the year-long passes, by 20% during the McQueen exhibit.
Fantastic. Okay. All right. With that, I'm going to try to switch over to Magda.
Okay. So as we are talking about scenes, then you can see that some of cultural institutions are becoming scenes, and I want to show you very quickly how do they do that. And I did some very simple research in the art museums in Chicago, in the Museum of Contemporary Art, in Art Institute, and in Smart Museum, just next to the corner. And also I compared it with what is going on in museums in Europe, and I want to show you very few pictures.
Just where is the file?
It's PDF, workshop presentation PDF.
The second one?
Yeah, no, this one.
The one above?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay.
So based on the Seattle Art Museum research, these are reasons for people to visit museum. So doing something fun or hanging out is as important as having contact with the art. And then we have a hierarchy of motivations, and we can see that we can compare experience from museums, like with experience within the church, in archive, or in the spa even. And then the Dallas Museum of Art published on their website 100 experiences that you can have in their museum. These are some examples, and you can see that they're very far from focusing on art only. This tour to the museum without looking at the art is maybe well mentioned. The presence of food can be a good example of an illustration of what I'm talking about. This is cooking and serving soup in Grand Palais in Paris. We have First Fridays programs in Museum of Contemporary Art where people can have DJs, dance floors, performances, drink, and do whatever they want, which is very far from what we used to think about museums. This is also First Friday. We have a food in pop art version, which is a very often topic of exhibitions, such as also Art and Appetite in Art Institute last month. We can still have like some recipes on their website from dishes you could see on the paintings or sculptures. And we had a very famous exhibition and project, The Feast, in Smart Museum with different workshops, performances, presentations around food and with the food. So food used to be a taboo in the museum space, and now you can not only see food, you can prepare, you can smell, eat, touch, share with others, and finally you can buy different forms in the gift shops. So like the museum became an everything place, you can call, and also like concert halls, theaters, cultural centers, like explore and expand their roles. And they're becoming like a big scenes with very diverse activities.
Great. Okay. Ilana Ventura is a student here, and I'll show you her next slide, and there we go.
All right. So the localistic scene is an example of communities seeking authenticity in their ways of life. As Sharon Zukin discusses in her work, Naked City, traditionally, authenticity is a consciously chosen lifestyle and a performance, where the desire for economic growth is coupled with the desire for authentic origins. However, lately, authenticity has acquired a different meaning with an emphasis on style, thereby shifting from a quality of people to a quality of things, and most recently, to a quality of experiences. Scenes are a context for understanding what is authentic by those who live there. My thesis that I'm working on for my MA is that walking shifts the relationships between scenes. Walking is both a product of the environment, if a place is walkable, and also a product of individual life choice on the part of the actor. Thus, walking intersects between the last two boxes, over here, in mediating the relationship between the chosen lifestyle and the quality of experience as authentic, by causing a person to interact more with the environment around them. In my thesis, I will be exploring if walkable areas, as measured as the percent to walk data from the US Census, lead to increased localistic amenities, which we've discussed. And basically, these are the amenities that score higher on the localism scale. And this is data from BizZip, the Yellow Pages, and also more subjectively through the DDB. and then try to refine this definition by looking at different types of localism, whether it be economic globalism or specifically anti-globalist types of localism. And then B, if walking distinguishes, is there? Nope.
No.
Sorry.
No, that's it.
And if walking distinguishes spaces similar in arts amenities into localistic and non-localistic types.
Thank you, Ilana. Steve, do you want to say anything now, or just?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I can say a few words about the Paris project.
That would be great. Just.
Well, the Paris project started with Terry contacted me and asking when there was a call for projects out of the city of Paris on imagining Paris in 2030. And the idea was that the major issue confronting Paris, the Paris region today, is the question of integrating the metropolitan area. This is a problem for a whole set of reasons in the Parisian case, in large part because the nature of local government and the tensions between the sort of very the traditionally very sort of avant-garde policies of the center, but that have a tendency to be more centrist politics, and then the famous red belt around the city that has always been, at least since, especially since the post-war period, deeply communist. And so very difficult to get a lot of these groups working together. And I should qualify that by saying there is sort of one kind of very wealthy area, the wealthiest area in Paris that is on the western part of the city. So the politics here make it almost impossible to think about the city together. And our idea, after being exposed to this theory that Dan and Terry had put together on scenes, the idea was to try to explore the extent to which scenes might be a way of getting beyond some of these political blockages. And so we essentially applied Dan and Terry's theory here on scenes to create what we called a map of Parisian scenes. And it was a project that lasted about 2 years. Terry made regular trips to Paris. We were working on this with a series of groups in Paris, especially at the Sorbonne. And we came to some pretty exciting conclusions. And the city of Paris was very interested in what we did. We finally gave the final presentation to a rather intimidating crowd of about 1,000 people in City Hall. So it was an exciting
There's a draft
project.
of the report circulating if you're interested.
If you're interested, there's also a video that one of my students made online on WordPress. If you're interested.
What's the name of the video?
The video is, if you type in scenes underground WordPress.
Yeah, it should be on the list of handouts that Will is getting run off.
It's also on YouTube? Oh, okay.
If you just go look Scenes Paris on YouTube.
Okay. So I'll just, I'll just end with the conclusion. We came to 3 conclusions in our report. The report we completed in 2011, and there were 3 conclusions. The first conclusion was that the Paris metropolitan region is it's much a question of seeing the Paris metropolitan region as making it. And the fact there, the idea behind this conclusion was that there tends to be on the part of obviously social scientists, but also planners, this idea that we need to build something, we need to make this happen, we somehow need to overcome these blockages. And one of the things that we discovered was that as we looked at these indicators that Terry developed and that he's been showing us here, is that much of the Paris metropolitan region already had logics that were integrating it. But that in many cases it was a question of sort of valorizing those logics and figuring out the right way to see them such that we could understand. And the maps that Terry just showed, where you're looking at neurotic people versus, these are the kinds of logics that are playing out on a metropolitan scale that aren't necessarily playing out when you look at things politically. And I'd have more to say about the politics as well, but we can come back to that if you're interested. The second was that that the scenes in the Paris metropolitan region are working usually against administrative and political boundaries, and they tend to operate in archipelago. And this, I'd love to talk to you about the walking project, because there tends to be a kind of polarization between walkable spaces and great distance in the metropolitan area. And that's one of the logics that we need to start integrating more effectively. This is also enhanced by, in the Parisian case, by the outstanding network of public transportation. So there's a sort of logic of the archipelago that functions in scenes as opposed to a kind of radial center-periphery dynamic that has really dominated a lot of our thinking about cities, including the Chicago School of Sociology, but in France it's even stronger. And the last is that many of these scenes are actually relatively fragile, and that while it can be very important to build new amenities, large amenities in neighborhoods, that can be a huge boost, that can be really be transformative. It can also, in the wrong instance, cause real problems and actually challenge or threaten neighborhoods. And this was the case that Pierre referred to in one of the former communist suburbs, where they had decided they were going to build a new Comédie Française, which is the great theater of France. They decided they were going to move this out to this neighborhood, and this, is obviously economically challenged and has been dealing with a series of issues in terms of including crime. And this was going to be a great project, and it led to massive resistance. They were just like, "No way! We're not going to do this. This is not how this is going to happen." So that was one of the studies in the report. So those were three of the conclusions, and I could say more, but I guess I'll stop there.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, we're open for questions. Yes.
To go back to the conversation about the Metropolitan Museum and the recent, I guess, current exhibit of jewelry by Jar, would you consider that as a scene, as the Met's attempt to move into creating a scene?
Yes. I mean, that is the idea of the scene, is that anything may be a scene. We can look at anything from a scene perspective. You can look at a classroom, you can look at a bank as an economic institution, as a political institution where there may be Democrats or Republicans who work in the bank, or you can look at it as a scene from a more aesthetic kind of perspective. Or a museum, clearly you can say a museum is a physical structure with these paintings on the wall done by so-and-so, or you can look at it, how is the museum being transformed by food and by music or by other kinds of things. And insofar as these other things may cumulatively add up and impact people's feelings, engagement and sense of excitement about a museum, or not, they may make you feel bored and that you want to get out and go back to the street or somewhere else instead. Having something about jewelry or Lady Gaga's clothes can make the museum a new, exciting place to be. So yes. For sure. No, for sure. I mean, the traditionalists, more so in France. I mean, people in the Louvre traditionally wanted nothing to do with this kind of stuff, and so you have Beaubourg doing the opposite of what the Louvre has done. Okay. Yes.
You talk about the rise of independent organized groups, the archipelago effect, the fragility of scenes. How much of these characteristics are directly attributable to the rise of social media and the fact that cultural activities often take place because of groups coming together in ways that are facilitated by the internet?
No, I mean that actually is a question. I had started to work with some computer scientists toward the end of the project. I mean, I think one of the avenues that scenes opens up, and I don't know if you continue to explore this, but is how scenes interact, reintroduce the relationship between internet or other forms of sort of virtual presence to actual urban space. I mean, I think that is really one of the avenues that has to be discovered, and the ways that we're creating sort of new level of interaction and construction of urban space through these interfaces with the internet. So I think there's no doubt about that. Places like, we started a study on Foursquare when it first got going, and I had a student come in and said, this is amazing. We sat down for a couple of weeks and tried to figure out ways of integrating, thinking about Foursquare into scenes theory.
But also just, as a traveler, I've noticed that in recent times, and I just came back from Madrid and from the Canary Islands, the first thing you do is you go on the web to see what's happening where. And that in many ways dictates how you spend your time. Absolutely. And certainly I would think first-time visitors to Paris, if they're under a certain age, that's exactly how they're going to manage their time.
We thought we wanted to put together an app as well for scenes. I mean, there's just a lot to, but the scenes really, I think you're absolutely right.
We're in the early to middle stages of engaging. There's a ton to do. And there are all kinds of new tools and new options with digitalization, for sure. Betty?
Would you talk just a little bit more about I think it was Asian countries and Brazil and places where the civic participation didn't lead to...
Yeah. Okay. Let me maybe try to use this. The last chapter of the book, called Can Tocqueville Karaoke, is a paper by me and two Portuguese. Deliberately, we worked with the Portuguese to try to understand more what's different about Portugal and Korea and other places, and so we have lots of Korean and Portuguese collaborators on the book. This is the idea is this is basically an upgraded version of Putnam, or Putnam and Tocqueville. So remember the four diagrams from Putnam and Tocqueville. Does participation increase trust and legitimacy? That's the key question. We do the same thing. We have trust over here, so trust in political institutions, social trust. Do you trust people in general? That they're people you know. But we have several measures of democratic processes that come from surveys. Protest, being engaged, a sense of duty. Do you feel that these are citizen roles? Do you feel that the citizens should respect and have duty toward the country in which etc., which are broader than just the normal trust and legitimacy kinds of items. We then include participation, broken up into four kinds of organizations: neighborhood, sort of religious, cultural, and professional. Then we have standard socioeconomic variables, and then what we do, which is a sort of a classic scene kind of analysis, is to say, how do the values in the bigger, more abstract cultural dimensions transform these relationships? We don't say it's this versus that. We say, how do these things? No, we don't say that artists are we don't assume that artists are Bohemian. We have people who have education, and then we say, if you work in one of these different cultural contexts, how does that transform the relationship? And here are the answers. We have, these are a little bit small, but this is the new political culture, clientelism, Protestantism, and Roman Catholicism. So in the new political culture context, you're more like, okay, so sorry, these are the results for arts organizations. So the basic item we worked with was a World Values Survey, which was asked, are you a member of any of the following kinds of organizations? Union, church, business organization, arts and culture. And if you said you were a member of an arts and culture organization, what was that related to? That is, if you're a member, are you more likely to protest, to say that I'm in favor of it's a good thing to protest in the streets and so forth? Do you have higher trust? And the answer is yes, you have higher trust in political institutions, but only in the new political culture. By contrast, in Protestantism in general, you don't have more trust is not increased by participation in the arts. The engaged role of a citizen is heightened in Protestant contexts, but not so much by the NPC and not in a class politics context. Class politics decreases social trust. Duty is reduced. Duty is weakened. If you participate in arts organizations in a new political culture context or in a clientelist context, you feel less of a sense of duty. But in a Roman Catholic context, you feel, if you participate in arts organizations, then you're doing things like going to the museums and looking at the Virgin Mary and Michelangelo, and you feel more of a sense of duty to the church and to the Italian state, for example. So in southern European, Portugal, Spain, Italy, this kind of thing is going on in ways that are different from Canada and the U.S. So that's basically the approach that we try to take to this. Not to say one is right or wrong or one variable is more important, but to look at how these things interpenetrate and shift the operation of one another. I'd say that's one way of giving you an overview of how we in a sense try not to say the West is right or wrong, or that that everything is the same, or that each country is unique. That is, we try to say, so this is based on about 40 different countries, 80,000 individuals, and we created the new political culture context or scene, if you will, from individual survey items in this case, which is a little bit unusual, but it's it led to interesting results.
Questions, comments?
Let me see if I had anything else here I wanted to. I don't know if this crowd wants more data and statistics or doesn't want any of that, but just to show you that it's there, that this is an example of how what explains job growth across all U.S. zip codes. Number one factor is arts jobs. More arts jobs in a zip code, the more it has economic growth. When you control these standard variables used by urban economists, geographers, and others. Education is number two. Insignificant: crime, cost of living, and county population size. Significant is glamour. So glamour is more important than the classic things you read about in the business pages. And then we put together some of these different scenes dimensions in factor analyses. So this is factor one. This is a way of sort of it looks almost like the classic urban rural kind of Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft dimension, which is interesting to have it turn up there. And how many of you from Chicago know about lumpen? Okay. Let me just say a word. We had a student do a BA, and this is an amazing. I've had Ed Marzuski come to class. Welcome to silliness. I'd like to argue that not all of our work is meant to be ironic. We do use every means possible to get multiple measures across. But an example of their kind of civic participation in Chicago. balloons and pillows. There was an establishment art show at the Merchandise Mart, and as the people were coming out from the art show, in the Chicago River was Ed Marzewski dressed, dispensing orders by walkie-talkie, dressed in a manner that would impress Caesar himself, clad in a cape and a suit of plastic Roman armor to boot. In the midst of the ensuing confusion, someone yelled out, "Attack!" and 50 or so art school students come revolutionaries broke into a vicious pillow fight, indiscriminately assaulting legionnaires and passers-by alike, stopping only when a sufficient portion of the troop lay prostrate on the ground. This was the art war, the final stand of Edmar and his ragtag platoon, a last-ditch effort to attempt to overthrow the Merchandise Mart's commercialized bull. Okay, so this is the new politics and culture which we have with, where is this? Bridgeport, the center of Chicago machine politics in the Irish traditional style. This is transforming Bridgeport, and Lumpen is the leader and organizer. If the future is the apocalypse, then Bridgeport is the community of the future, etc. Okay, so lots of things are happening in our city that you don't understand with the old maps from the past. Okay.
Thank you very much.